Attend the tale of Reinier van Madagascar. The archives of the Council of Justice at the Cape of Good Hope contain this grim story about an enslaved person called Reinier van Madagascar. And I apologize for the gruesomeness of the details here that I will be reading. The year is 1749, and it is January, the middle of summer. Reinier is an escaped farm slave captured in the mountains around Franschhoek, where he had survived and he had survived unnoticed for some 20 years. Upon being recaptured, he vividly recalled the events leading to his desertion. He had been enslaved to a certain Matthias Krugel. Now, Reinier had a daughter called Sabina with a woman he called his wife, Manika van Bengalen. This daughter was at the time suffering severe beating and physical abuse on the part of the owner's wife, whose name is not indicated. The reasons for the beatings the court documents do not disclose, but it is clear that this violence was fueled by alcohol. Reinier, in his distress, was taunted by fellow enslaved persons Hans and Patas for his inability to defend his daughter Sabina. And they said, and here I quote, "You are such an old jongen," slave, and have helped to pay off this farm. You can plow and do all sorts of other work so well, and yet you can endure such maltreatment. If this mate, this young woman, had been our daughter, we would have taught the boss, the owner, we would have taught him differently. The court continues, and I quote further, "As a consequence of this, the confessant, that is Reinier, out of dejection and grief, took up a knife lying on the table in the kitchen and gave his aforementioned owner 3 stabs with it, without being able to say where, seeing that the lamp was almost half burnt out. Upon this, the confessant immediately took flight to above the ploughed fields of his owner, where he remained for about 1 week, and thereafter went from there to the mountains at Franschhoek, at which place he remained for, as best he can remember, a period of 16 years. Extraordinarily long, actually. After which he proceeded from there to the mountain situated above the farm of Jan Dubuisson, where he likewise remained some years, and where he was also some days ago captured by some Europeans, taken to Stellenbosch, and then delivered into the hands of justice." End quote. By 1749, the time of these documents, the daughter Sabina, the farmer Krugel, and the farmer's violent and alcoholic wife were all dead. By now, only Manika, age 60, which is around the age that is estimated for Reinier as well at the time of his arrest, having been in the intervening years unaware of what had happened to Reinier and even whether he was still alive. Like Nelson Mandela, 214 years later, Reinier was sentenced to life imprisonment on Robben Island with hard labor. Unlike Mandela, Reinier died on the island, or so we might assume, because we don't hear about him again. So some aspects of this are highly unusual, especially the lengthy time living undetected. Reinier had survived by capturing rock rabbits, or dassies, and fish in the Berg River, whereas most runaways either had to join up with other Maroons or else become assimilated to indigenous Khoi groups. The unforgiving landscape did not support escape from the settlement. What is remarkable is the level of insight this document gives into social relations on a remote farm in the slaveholding society. these documents from which I have quoted today um, help us to reconstruct one of 87 legal cases that have been the center of a joint project that I've undertaken with some scholars, whom I'll name in due course, which has become really a suite of related projects, and these are what I would like to discuss today. Now that I've given you an example. But first, a map. This map, it's a very beautiful map by a very fine map maker, but he rather distends the east-west extension here. In any case, if this is Stellenbosch, Franschhoek is to the east of Stellenbosch, about there. So the shape of my comments will start with some of the frameworks involved in the republication of these legal trials out of this book called Trials of Slavery, edited and translated by Nigel Worden and Gerald Groenewald. I will then pan out a little bit to think of the project as a whole and the modus operandi that my colleagues and I have evolved and are in the process of yet evolving. And thirdly, I would like to end with some critical questions, especially around exactly what narrative means in this context. And that will be the third part of my comments. So let us start with the frameworks. So the idea was to take these trials, which provide unique narrative evidence, uniquely granular evidence, admittedly not that of enslaved persons themselves, but nonetheless uniquely valuable evidence into this slaveholding society, and make these documents more widely available than their publication in this large red book readily makes available. So that is the core of the project. That has quickly become a broader project of public history, and that is to emphasize a public audience within that, and somehow, and this is something I would very much like to discuss, the relation between scholars and a public audience in a project like this, because that is very much in flux and very much in negotiation as our work continues to evolve. So how far have we got? We have, our team has created a spreadsheet out of the trials. We've combed through them very carefully. We're currently in the process of creating maps for them. And we hope soon to be able to publish these trials online. We have secured the permissions to reprint the translations, which belong to what used to be the Van Riebeeck Society and is now as the Historical Publications of Southern Africa. So, as regards frameworks, the first point is that this is in an important sense an archival project. This is seeking to, this is making archival interventions, but it is also a gesture towards public history to make these exact resources available to a wider audience. And one of the parts of this has been to create a visual history, to use a variety of evidence. And here we're working with Paul Weinberg to create a series of video installations, the first of which has already found its way into the Ezekiel Slave Lodge as of last week. So this is an exciting moment for our team that we have this very important opportunity to share the fruits of our work. The other part of the framework has to do with the Indian Ocean world. Now, it so happens that I the great good fortune of having in Krish Sita and Stefania Manfio two scholars who do archaeological research in the Indian Ocean world, particularly in Mauritius, but they think very much in an ocean-wide connection, and this is, I think, something that certainly scholars of Cape slavery have done before, but it does seem to me that there's an opportunity and there's a need to push that further. And this is a map from the Iziko Slave Lodge that illustrates the sources of the slaves using statistics from the late Robert Shaw, from the Indian subcontinent, from East African coast, from Madagascar, and from the Indonesian archipelago, being very roughly co-equal sources of the 63,000 or so people who came in bondage to the Cape between the 1650s and 1807. Emancipation happened in the 1830s, though the aftermaths of slavery are in many ways very much with us. That's a whole other area, horizon of inquiry. So much for the framework of the project. And just to show that, to make the point that Indian Ocean studies are coming into their own, the Red Book is in a sense replicated by a scholar of enslavement in Sri Lanka, Matthias van Rossum, and a team of scholars have published a series of trials, a smaller number, but at greater length, in this book that has appeared very recently. So again, the individual stories of enslavement are an important gesture to creating a more granular history, and this is what the book this particular book by Van Rossum and co. Present, just like Trials of Slavery have done, just like we are aiming to do in our project. So how does all this line up? And I realize the word opportunism has negative connotations, but I do want to say that the evolution of this project has responded to to a series of opportunities that have simply come our way to curate or recurate a number of different archives, and it's for this reason that the slave trials have become accompanied by a number of other projects, not just the visual history telling in a series of short documentary-like video installations, the story of enslavement in different aspects, but also a suite of maps. Let's start with the spreadsheet. This is the starting point. This is the spreadsheet, and I'm happy to go into details about how this spreadsheet has evolved. This is the spreadsheet which we hope will become a website in due course. Obviously, there are many choices to make in the process of that, but this is our spreadsheet, and if you scrolled all the way down to somewhere in the middle, you would get the case of Renier van Madagascar in this format, on its way between the archive via the book, via the spreadsheet, to a web version, which we hope will reach a wide readership. So I've already mentioned the visual history, and that visual history has a strongly site-specific element. And here is one of the very few public monuments to the end of enslavement. This is in Elam, in a remote town in the Southern Cape. This monument was put up in the 1930s to commemorate the emancipation. There are very few such public commemorations. This, plus many others, will become part of our visual history. The second one has to do with maps. Now, it so happens, purely by chance, my own university has partnered with the University of Cape Town to digitize maps of the early Cape, and so what we're trying to do is to curate a subset of that and create a rich interpretive material around that. So these maps will be a further project. It turns out that there's the maps that are already in the libraries of UCT and now Stanford digitally are just the tip of the ocean. The tip of the iceberg. I'm sorry, and that is because the offices like the Deeds Office, the Surveyor General's Office have enormous wealth of maps that have never been curated in the same way because they are not brand name maps necessarily. On the other hand, they allow much, much greater detail than is possible even in a fine map like this map of Berlin. Anyway, so there's much, much more work to be done around the maps. This has to be done with care and caution, and it's a slow process, and that will take considerable time. So Tracy Randall had curated a considerable collection of music, some of which has very clear roots in enslaved parts of the Cape. It's tricky in that this does not belong entirely under the rubric of enslaved histories because there are many other features which would belie such a characterization. Nonetheless, this is something that has already been curated. It was offered to a South African university which was unable to take it up at the time, and at Tracy's suggestion, we are currently trying to house this digitally at Stanford University. Not a single item, not a single document will leave South Africa to come here, but nonetheless, this archive that has been curated by Tracy will, I hope, soon have a digital home in the Stanford University Library and its archive of recorded sound. And then there is a curation to do around retellings. So if the story with which I began is a micro-narrative, there are many creative retellings. And of course we know from scholars like Saidia Hartmann that the imaginative filling out of narratives is a very important, an essential part of commemoration. And this is what has already been done by several writers, many of whom are deeply invested in archival exploration. So these are different aspects. These are twin projects, as it were, which might become part of the same early Cape portal. The background against this is that if archives everywhere are in danger, two major fires, one at the University of Cape Town and one at Parliament, in the past 12 months have come as very vivid reminders that digital preservation can and should go along with the physical preservation. Just yesterday I heard a talk which quite independently referred to archival material, unique archival material that had been lost from the UCT Jagger Library fire very close to a year ago. The Parliament fire also had impact that is yet to be tallied fully. So this is the background to the digital curation and archiving. It's also true that there are already major digital projects, and both of these, one of them is out of Stellenbosch and the other is a Stellenbosch Scandinavian partnership. These are already underway, but both of these have more an economic history element and thus different and to the kinds of work that my colleagues and I have been doing. So, what are the critical questions here? The first has to do with visibility, just how visible is this? And as someone that grew up in Cape Town, this is history that is these are pasts that are hiding in plain sight. The enslaved elements are they might be known, but they are not necessarily embraced at all. And we could get into a conversation about why that is so, both on the part of the descendants and on the part of other South Africans. But nonetheless, there's no question that that enslaved pasts are relatively recently embraced by historians, and to this day have only very limited take-up on the part of South Africans. It's also true that there are very few visual illustrations, and so this from another part of the Dutch Seabourn Empire is a reminder of the relative paucity of visual evidence we have, visual representations of enslavement at the Cape. It's not that there's none, it's simply that there is not very much at all. This is one of the few, and this is a sketch which has, as a result, been very often reproduced. And it's the exception that proves the rule from a very important early ethnographic work by Peter Kolb. A site like Groot Constantia is on the tourist route for any overseas visitor to South Africa. The buses stop there, the red buses, and other buses. But it's only fairly recently that its enslaved labor, has been commemorated within that framework. There are now several panels that do so inside this building. So it's not that enslaved pasts are not commemorated, simply that what there is has come belatedly and is by no means ubiquitous in all the heritage sites which were for many decades tended by enslaved persons. So this is quite an interesting image in its representation of an enslaved person. It's in the corner, an incidental and rather whimsical detail if you look at the gesture on the part of this person. And it also creates a very interesting, very visible contrast between the enslaved person, who is a child presumably, yet dressed up in elegant European garb, as opposed to the indigenous Khoi people who are here in the middle of the map in a more prominent position and in more direct contact with the natural history of trees and fauna. And I've corrected the sizes here in order to show this contrast that we find in this particular and very distinctive map by Niehoff. So another, if visibility is the first point, the second one has to do with the way data functions in as violent a history as I illustrated with my opening comments. So how does pathos work here? Now, of course, this is a comment that's made of many histories of enslavement, and just recently I came across this New York Times article which makes this exact point of some of the very substantial digital projects that have been undertaken, such as the Slave Voyages project. And certainly the Atlantic world has been very well served for a considerable time by digital projects. This particular writer offers the critique that this is not American slavery for what it was, for this very reason that statistics, the social scientific approach that focuses on quantitative data is problematic in ways that are not always addressed. The other, and here I also find it very interesting to recognize the comments of Margaret Lenter in an article, a very interesting article on the very law cases that I'm discussing, and comparing the stories from these legal cases with Holocaust testimony. She does discuss the limits of what can be represented. So this raises the question of the nature and the limits of representation in histories as brutal as these are. In ancient studies, we do pathos. I'm not going to say the Greeks invented pathos. It's simply that we use a language such as passion and pathos itself that comes from the Greeks. And so I'd like to pose the question, is when we see the internal distress of someone like Renier being taunted by fellow enslaved persons, is that like the internal monologues of Medea in Seneca or Euripides, or in this this Pompeian fresco? So this is a question about pathos and how it relates to the data, the kinds of material, the kinds of questions that we might ask of available material. And here we have the data that is seeking to become a website, where free tagging is one way of picking up on particular elements that may be interesting for a particular case. Yet, on the other hand, we tried to find the criteria that could be used for each of the cases. So I would like to present this as a tension between pathos and data. Something that interests me a great deal is the nature of narrative. How does narrative work in here? Well, what I read you at the beginning could easily be seen as a micro-narrative that is a very particular story in time and place in which an individual and their own circumstances come to the fore. And from that, in the hands of an accomplished historian, preferably French, of the mid to late 20th century, that story can tell a much bigger history. And of course, that mode of writing history has had an enormous impact in the United States. So this is the kind of a narrative that is a possibility that is only slowly begun to be realized in this context. We do not have in the Cape the kinds of stories, the kinds of narratives that the United States have in texts such as these. What we do have is a great deal of details that can be found, rather like my team and I have done in our spreadsheet. So if we take narrative in terms of the signified, what it signifies, we can see violence that's pervasive and it's assumed, and this can lead to the question of is this what creates a slave society? The pervasiveness of violence and the impacts of that. We might think of the workings of gender in this. There's a lot of gender-based violence, and authors such as Bararoon and Murray have had a great deal to say about that. Yvette Christianse, in her novel, has turned that into a novelistic account that's deeply embedded in the historical archive. We might think of the social order. This is the word which gave us the word amok, a word which comes into English language in the 16th century from Indonesia and the Indian Ocean world, and it means frenzied violence, typically undertaken by a male person. So there are instances here of somebody running amok. There, we actually find the term used, this Malay loan word being used. Excuse me, it's a bit noisy outside. We actually find this term being used, and we can think on this basis about the nature of the social order. We might turn to Victor Turner and see any one such narrative as a social drama, as the structures of experience. So all of these are the kinds of things you can do with these narratives, and this is what we've already begun to do. But it seems to me that there's another element as well, and to think of narrative itself as a signifier. And that is of course, we could think, we have to recognize that these are not auto-narratives. These are not, these are highly mediated, and they're mediated through a hostile legal structure, largely hostile legal and court structure. These are not the voices of slaves by any means, even when they're quoted. The issue of language is submerged under the translation into Dutch for most of the time, and of course we for our team we're using English for broader circulation and broader readership, but some of these documents are not even in Dutch. They're in Bugis or other languages, some in Portuguese, Bugis from Indonesia. So what I'm suggesting is that we can think of these narratives as signifiers rather than merely signified. And I've already mentioned that these histories are seldom visualized, even though in the kinds of details we've seen are very vivid. There's another problem around narratives here as well, and that is to say that the ANC narrative, the ANC ideology has downplayed, sometimes even consciously and directly downplayed, the history of Cape slavery in favor of the metaphorical turn, namely that the ANC, founded in 1912, is the metaphorical liberator of South Africa from apartheid. So this is not historical slavery, but the metaphorical turn that sees oppression as a kind of slavery. And obviously this is of political use and significance and value but it is not historically accurate in the sense of somebody studying the institutions, the practices, and dynamics of enslavement. And so here is a gesture of liberation. And here is the slave lodge in Cape Town, which itself reflects that. Excuse me, it's a second. I'm sorry. Here we see. I invite you between these two photographs to contrast the micro narrative, such as the one we've seen, and the meta narrative of liberation that is very much linked to the ANC's ideology of its own role in South African history. We might see this as history versus metaphor. And the final point really has to do with the degree to which this kind of history is welcome in South Africa. Descendants do not welcome it for all kinds of reasons. And this is partly because the indigenous pasts are more attractive to many people who under apartheid were classified colored. Enslaved histories, there is no there's no obvious or immediate benefit to claiming enslaved pasts for the majority of such people who might do so. And this has a very practical question of what is the audience for this project? What do my colleagues and I think we're doing? Well, yes, we're still working that out. We are certainly trying to work with archives and to present archives in ways that scholars can use. But I must say, and perhaps this is the influence of my colleague and friend Paul Weinberg, that the heritage professionals with which I've worked, that the public history element has really seemed a very important, and it's very easy to get caught up in the public history element of that, partly because these histories of enslavement have been relatively neglected for a very long time. This is not always the case. It's not that slavery is always a source of shame by any means. There's a wonderful photographic exhibit in which people whose names end with coincide with a month of the year were photographed in an exhibit that was really trying to use photography combined with video interviews to explore identities rooted in slavery. Just the subtitle of this exhibit is actually a profound contribution to the politics around enslaved heritage in South Africa. The first part of the main name is February, that comes from a poem by Diana Ferris. So this heritage, which may sometimes be unwanted and is at best an object of question and contestation, has personal and family implications. It has implications for continuities and ruptures about the narratives of South African nation building. And so I recently was able to visit Freedom Park in South Africa. This is an impossible room to photograph. Just imagine this is a very large room, and a person would stand up here at eye level to see these screens. So this is a very tall wall, and this is an abstract installation that illustrates history of enslavement in South Africa. Now, Freedom Park and its museum are all about it's all about South Africa in the African continent. And so the choice made within the coverage of enslavement at Freedom Park is to privilege Atlantic slavery, which is, well, it has a much smaller part in South African history than in Cape history than does Indian Ocean slavery. All the quotations here are from the Atlantic world, and that has to do with the fact that this museum, this entire commemorative project, was the pet project of President Thabo Mbeki. It tells a story of the African Renaissance and the place of South Africa in the African continent. And so Cape slavery, the Indian Ocean world, find no place in this flagship museum, this flagship commemorative structure in Pretoria. So you can see why the many problems attending this. And the reason to take these on now is that at this very moment, the Iziko Slave Lodge is in the process of a redesign, refurbishment. And this was a very happy coincidence in that my colleagues and I were able to work a little bit with that institution, as well as some other museums, in the hope that the visual history that we have been creating can find a place there. This is as I wind up, this is really an inflection of digital humanities, of an archival-based project that has looked to the public to answer a need, to answer to fill a gap, which is certainly acutely felt by myself, having grown up in Cape Town, but something that continues to require the help and is a very necessary and very important interface, I feel, between scholarly and public history. Here is an opportunity. The question is how to create websites that are satisfying and as useful for scholars as, say, the Atlantic voyages have been, while also attending to the public elements. And in my very last slide, just last week, I was very pleased to see that the first video installation that Paul and I had created was part of the reopening of the Iziko Slave Lodge just last Friday. So this couldn't have been better timed. However, that doesn't mean our work is finished. It's hardly begun. This project has become compartmentalized in very particular ways. I do hope that its archival, its scholarly, its DH origins will grow rather than be swamped by the public history element. And I do hope that these different elements can work together, just as it has been important in our project team to be a combination of scholars, of heritage professionals, of creative artists, and of students, both in South Africa and beyond. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.